My guest today is Luckystar Miyandazi. She's a policy officer for African institutions with the think tank ECDPM. Welcome to DW News Africa, Luckystar. We're going to talk about von der Leyen's plans in a moment, but first, just give us a sense of what is the relationship status, if I can, between the EU and the AU at present?
Thank you so much for having me, Christine. The relationship between EU and Africa, we are seeing a dynamics of change because historically the relationship has been one of asymmetry, where it was more one-sided on the EU looking for power and influence and also donor-recipient relationship. But lately, especially for the past 2 years, we've seen it transform into a stronger partnership where Africa seems to be playing a greater role within the AU, and with other key players coming up, the EU is also mainstreaming Africa as an important and strategic partner. So now moving towards the so-called partnership of equals.
Yeah, so partnership of equals, and that's something that we're hearing from the current EU Commissioner, Ursula von der Leyen. She's talking about investment partnerships as opposed to aid. But this isn't the first time we've heard such rhetoric from European officials, and I wondered, Luckystar, what's different this time?
Well, that's quite interesting. As here at ECDPM, we do a lot of research on that, and that's one of the things that we've pointed out, that there's been a lot of rhetoric on, placing Africa at the heart of EU partnership as a strategic partner. But what we're seeing is different with what von der Leyen is doing, is the fact that there's high level of engagement like we've never seen before. We saw her first trip out of the EU diplomatic trip was to the African Union in February. We're seeing greater engagement. We're seeing directorates within the EU prioritize African issues. So it's the high level of engagement and also a lot of mainstreaming within the European Commission of African issues like we've never seen before. So this is sort of bringing out a transformative agenda, showing that the rhetoric can be done away with, and we can now actually focus on advancing and sustaining Europe and Africa relations.
Yeah, so one's looking at all these efforts, Luckystar, and thinking, great, listening to what you're saying about all the efforts that have been made under Ursula von der Leyen, for example. But is this maybe a little bit too late, considering countries like China and how they've cemented themselves on the continent?
Well, on the one hand, it's never too late because the EU is still Africa's strongest partner. It's still Africa's strongest donor. And you need to remember that there's a shared history there. So this is quite an important history, unlike other partners that are now coming up, as I would say. So in terms of Russia, China, Middle Eastern partners coming up as partners for Africa, they don't have this traditional relationship with Africa. Europe and Africa also have the summits that they hold, and this year is going to have the 6th EU-Africa Summit, which is quite a strong forum that brings in a lot of these leaders to discuss a lot of strategic partnerships that has already been consolidated in both continents. So I think that it's not too late. The thing that has changed now is that the EU has realized that they need to work with Africa, and a lot of these things that are being done within the EU for Africa without engagement of a lot of the key players in Africa are actually what is changing.
That was Luckystar Miyandazi, a policy officer for African institutions with the think tank ECDPM.